Hi, my name is Cali Dolfi. I'm a senior data scientist in Red Hat's open source program office. And yeah, I'm here to talk about all things 8 Knot and all of the related projects around it. And then we'll do a demo and we can talk all thing community metrics. Just doing insights out of chaos. We'll go through everything, but a lot of the tools that we use and what's where we get our data is from the chaos project, and we work closely with them as well. So this is just the coined phrase that I like to use for all of my presentations around 8 Knot. So first I wanted to open up this question. If people don't know the answers to this, think about it, put it in chat. We can come back to it later. But what are the type of questions that you have about the open source communities that you're involved in or the ones that you depend on? I don't know. Let me see if I can get back to chat. I don't think. There we go. Anybody can ask them out loud. I'll give it a second. Anything about communities? Anything you're concerned about? Pie in the sky, anything?
Essentially, just the viability of the community itself, right? Is the community based around my project active? Are they doing the right things? Who are these folks that are actually contributing to my projects? Like those sorts of things I'm very curious about, because sometimes it's so vague and you can't see everything, especially right at a glance.
Yeah. Who's supporting the project?
Also, one of the things that seems difficult, but maybe this will be educational for me, is where you've got open source communities who, rightly or wrongly, I guess, self-implode their projects for whatever reason. Being able to track that before the case, if it's possible. If it's not, yeah, that would be one of those things.
Nice. If you'll say them verbally, can y'all put them in the chat as well? Because I'll try to, the ones that I do have visualizations that answer, I want to make sure I can show which visualizations those are and then how I read the graphs to answer that. License policy, yeah, that one's huge, especially these days. License changes, how to make quieter voices for sure. Wait, we'll go to my second question to start us. Oh, wait. What do you want to know about a project before you get invested or dependent? Like in that early phase, you probably, a lot of times there's a couple of different projects that solve a similar-ish technical has a similar-ish technical solution. What do you want to know about those projects before you make that big decision? Security issues, huge these days.
Is it active? Was the last commit 8 years, 10 years ago versus was it last week? Do they have like good release cadence? Do they release minors patches on a good basis rather than releasing once every 4, 5, 8, 9, 10 weeks, months, whatever it is?
Yeah, definitely. Viability, supportability. Yeah. Awesome. These are all great questions. And continue putting them in the chat because my demo is planned is pretty short because I like to just go off of and look at things that people are actually interested in and not just my spiel. Sweet. Okay, how do I? So I'm first going to go into the motivation behind 8 Knot, why we made a project when probably some of the people in the group may be more familiar than others. There are different tools that have been available for a while to try to do data analysis around open source communities. I came into Red Hat around 2020, mid 2020 as a data science intern, and I was doing a lot of one-off requests, and I did an audit of all of the projects in the space. And now even more so than at the time, it became very obvious to me that it was all created by usually community managers trying to create a data analysis platform rather than data scientists or people with like taking in the data science workflow and applying that to open source communities. There's 25 plus years of research and things in Python and R, and coming from the academic background that I had, I wanted to capitalize on all of the research and the tooling that had been applied to other spaces, and especially the methodology, and then take it to open space. And so that's really what came to be 8 Knot. And now I just want to go into some of the general projects that feed into 8 Knot and just the general community metric space. The first one to know about is CHAOSS. There's two major sides of the CHAOSS project. It's under the Linux Foundation. You have the metric side. There's a lot of different working groups that talk about the definitions around metrics. And I can say, as the person who's done a lot of the technical work around 8 Knot, honestly, 90% of the work for metrics is the definitions around them. There's a lot of thought that has to go into that. And so it is great to have the resources that CHAOSS does with a very wide range of defined metrics. And if you go onto the CHAOSS page, and if people are interested in this, I'm sure we'll probably have time. We can go and I can show y'all. I honestly, whenever people come to me with questions, especially within Red Hat, the first place that I look is the CHAOSS defined metrics. And when people say sustainability, you could go onto CHAOSS's website, type in sustainability, and there would have a decent portfolio of metrics and how those metrics come together to answer the overall question of sustainability. And on the other side, you have the software, which usually is broken down into, there's a Bitergia project, and then the one that we work directly with is the Augur project. And so Augur is a project that you give it repositories and it populates a relational database with pretty much any information that you can get around its GitHub you're talking issues, PRs, it handles identity and handles the large amount of data engineering that comes with trying to do this type of analysis. It is not realistic as the data scientist to also be responsible for the data engineering. And so we'll get into that a little bit more, but it takes the absolute mess that is the GitHub API and create structure around it to provide us the ability to do the in-depth analysis that we do. Project 8 Knot fits under a larger branch called Project Aspen. 8 Knot, this is the community data analysis dashboard. It's based in a cloud native container. We use Augur, and it is a fully Python native data science tool chain using Dash, Plotly, Pandas, NumPy, any of your common data science packages in Python. There is a publicly hosted version of it, actually two of them, and we'll be showing those. And there's also the ability in their setup for you can host them yourselves. And this is the group for financial institutions. A lot of people are going in this group are going to be wanting to do this on their own internet. And Augur and 8 Knot is set up specifically so then you can host your own instances, collect on the repositories that you want. And that's something that you can do pretty easily on your own. The second portion of it, which we won't talk about too much today, is the open research side of it. And right now we're working on developer network graph analysis. So trying to understand how people move between open source projects so we can understand the churn, see where people are going, what are those emerging projects, and understand the behaviors around them. So this is a little bit of a visual representation of very high level. What is the technical architecture of 8 Knot? You give your repos and organization URLs to Augur. It's a relational database with GitHub data and an enforced relationship structure. That data populates 8 Knot, which is the dashboard, and we have all the different visualizations. And how do these projects come together? You can think one of the side is the data engineering, one side is the data visualization, data science, and the Augur side is the main maintainer is Sean Goggins, for anybody who is familiar with him, under CHAOSS. And then 8 Knot is maintained directly under the Red Hat's open source program office, with me being the. So now let's go into a demo. This is our publicly hosted version that's managed by Red Hat. Anybody can use it and play around with it, see what they think about the analysis. CHAOSS also runs a instance of it, and if people want to use that one, I can provide the link to that as well. And so this is the open up page. I like to point out that on this, most of the things that I'll talk about on how to use it is on the welcome page, tells you about some of the built-in functionality that comes with Plotly that are maybe not as intuitive if you've never used Plotly graphs before, explains how 8-Not works at a more in-depth level, and then how to log into Augur, because you can log into the Augur front end, our database, and you can create your project groups, which is great because you can, if you have a similar set of groups of projects that you always want to see, then you don't have to select them. But the use case that a lot of people use it for, especially me, is that triggers collection in the Augur database. So if our public instance doesn't have a repository that you want to look at, go create an account, add that to a user group, and that will trigger collection. So then the next day or two, you can come back and you can see all the visualizations populated around the ones that you care about. So I'll do a kind of a vague walkthrough of the app, and then we can start answering questions and going into things. And I'll go through the chat to try to point out which visualizations I would use to answer some of the questions that have been asked. This is our just repo overview page. Some of the things I find really interesting. This is something we've started to implement, is knowing what type of languages the files that go into this project by files and by lines of code. Package versioning updates, which can be really important if you're considering a project for the first time, understanding how up to date are they on their dependencies, which can tell you a lot about the overall maintenance of the project. And then we have the SSF scorecard, which I know people have been asking a lot for as of late. It hits some of those overarching points that you'll said in the chat. It's a good first stop. It's not where you should end, but it's a good place to start. And they have it very specifically defined what these scores are based off and what they mean. And you can look at them here. Any of the graphs have a info tab that will tell you exactly what data goes into the graph and how it's synthesized. And then the general info, which some of the people had mentioned that they want to know what type of licenses that are being used. And so we have that and then what type of the last release time, the average time between releases. And so this page is really great to be able to get a first look at the repositories that you're looking at. And I'll point out we only have one repository in the search bar right now. I just put SDOSN because it's a project that I know has a pretty substantial amount of data. But if you have multiple repositories, this will have a drop down and you can select a couple. Once I go through all of these, I probably will. I did end up collecting on the FINOS one, but some of their secondary collection hadn't completed yet. And so I wanted to show it with a fully populated results, and then I can go back and show some of the stuff that's specific to the FINOS org. I know that's something that y'all are more familiar. And so yeah, we have the different pages. This is looking at different forms of contributions. Some of the things that I personally look at whenever I'm looking at a project for the first time is the pull request staleness. It's one thing to know how many pull requests are open over time, but I find it to be a lot more rich to understand the actual behaviors of the pull requests. How long is there just a bunch of pull requests that have been open for a year or 2 years and they're just stale and sitting there? Is there a churn of pull requests? A lot of the stuff, and people ask me all the time to make scores for different things. OpenSSF does that for specific things. That's their thing. For me personally, I don't like to put like a good or bad rating on visualizations and metrics like this because they're just different. It's context. Sometimes, if you have a project, for example, with the pull request activity that has a set of pull requests that have been open for 2 years and they just don't close them. Yeah, it would be great if they would close those because they're obviously stale and not going to be used. But if they still have a pretty significant churn of pull requests that are getting open and closed every month, that's more of it's a niche detail rather than something that you should be really concerned about. But that's one of the things. I also look at that pretty significantly for the issues activity. The staleness works the same way. And almost all of the visualizations, you can choose the parameters for it. What is considered stale or any of the other ones is very dependent on the size of the repository and the behavior of it. And so we allow users to be able to select the parameters that make the most sense for the communities that they're analyzing. Another thing is we have the assignment count, so it's understanding how many of the issues or the pull requests actually end up getting assigned. That's another one of the things. It's good, bad, or otherwise. It's just the behavior of the project. One thing that I also really like to look at is the time to first response around pull requests. I think it gives a pretty interesting view of how active the community is around when pull requests are being made. And one thing that's good to note that I forgot is that all of these visualizations automatically filter out bot data or GitHub identified bots. If you want the bot data, you can click to turn off that filtering. I think most people just want that out of the case. So these are first responses by people. And you can see how the conversation rate is happening around the pull request over time. And I see the question, is GitLab supported? Yes and no. That's something that we're actively working on right now. Augur is set up to be compatible with any Git-based repository. Right now, we're actually actively working on GitLab of going and doing an audit because the API doesn't exactly line up. And while you can choose to select on GitLab, you're not getting as in-depth data at this point, and GitLab doesn't provide as much data as the GitHub API. So we're trying to figure out how to turn off different visualizations for people don't get any misconceptions about those projects. Yeah, misconceptions about the project just because that data doesn't exist on that platform. Yeah, I'll keep on trucking through and going through some of the visualizations that I look at pretty regularly. This one, I would say, is probably the most important visualization that I look at in every single use case is contributor growth by engagement. Your contributor base is always over time is always going to go up and to the right. You can't have like negative total contributors over time. And so that's always going to be the case. But seeing the consistency of the drifting and active contributors, I think tells you a lot about the community. What is the trends? Is it staying really stable in the size of it? Is it going down? Is it going up? This right here, I think, tells you a whole lot about the active state of the community and where it's at in its life cycle. And so I'll keep on going through. Another one of the big ones, I don't know how familiar people are with different common data analysis around community metrics. One of the big ones is people talk about is bus factor. The analogy is that, okay, if 1, 2 people get, which is why we say lottery, we'll say the bus factor is the common term. We use lottery factor, which is if 1 or 2 of your contributors wins the lottery and never is seen on the internet again tomorrow, what is the impact on your community? And one thing that I like to look at, I might pull up another visualization where you can see this a little more specifically, but looking at lottery factor over time. And this is by each individual contribution type. I'm just going to see over time, you can see here that the concept of lottery factor or bus factor, at least in this case, is we can see here is that it's over a 6-month window. And it's what is the least amount of contributors that make up 40 or 50% in this case of that style of contribution. For example, in this month, it means that at the least amount, there's 51 people that contributed 50% of the open issues, this is actually an incredibly high lottery factor, which is really great for this community. That means that there's a whole lot of people. This is also kind of showing some of the functionality of Plotly, seeing that, okay, that's great to know, but I want to get a better view of the rest of the data. I now know what the issued open one is. Let me click that and and start to look at some of the other activities. Overall, actually, this project has a pretty solid lottery factor. A lot of times you end up seeing your lottery factor at 2, 3. Once you seeing a lottery factor, but you can see over time now it's becoming more and more dependent on a small amount of people. And so when people are considering, okay, what is the viability of this project? These are the type of things that you can consider once you get more in-depth data. You're not going to be able to just look at a repository and know that over in Q3 of last year, there was only 3 people made up 50% of the commits of that community. And so that's a pretty substantial piece of information to know. I like looking at this over the span of time. This one looks at it in a pie chart, and you can choose what time period, how many contributors you want to see. So these are 2 different views of what I view as a really rich data set that wouldn't have been possible in the tool base that it existed before 8.9. I think this is a really good, like, why did we create this? And I point to visualizations like this. People are asking who is involved in the project. This is where I'll point to the affiliation page. Whenever you're looking at company or organizational affiliation or project, it is a very hard question to answer. And so the strategy that we go about doing it is looking at that question from a couple of different angles. This is never something where you should be like, oh, this is the exact number of contributors are for X or Y company, unless you have very specific data that's much more specific than this is. This is more to get a general idea. Okay, after looking at it from a couple of different perspectives, I know that X company is significantly involved and then Y company is a little bit less involved. And here are some of the other major players. And so this is about we have 5 different views on organizational diversity or the affiliations. And this is one of those times where it's good you can look at the about graph and it'll tell you the exact definition for each of these visualizations, but I'll point out each one of these and how they're different. So this first pie chart is just having the unique contributor count by email domain. So that means if contributor A has, I don't know, 1,000 commits and contributor B has 1 commit, those 2 contributors are counted the same. Versus in the second graph, contributor A would be counted 1,000 times and contributor B would be counted once. Another thing that we find to be pretty rich is the ability to look at associated activity. GitHub has a storage of every email that's ever been associated with your account. So if you open one pool, you have one email for your notifications and you use 3 different emails at different points for commit logs. All of those are associated with a singular account. And you honestly don't know which of those identities or domains you're committing that singular person is contributing on behalf of. So it's just the associated activity. A lot of times I like to exclude Gmail, exclude GitHub. Actually, yeah, there it is over there. And so you can see Silo, Apache, IBM, Microsoft, Red Hat. For Istio, that makes a lot of sense. But you can get a pretty good idea of the overall large players in this. And what's interesting is a lot of times in these, it actually does make sense because Google is different than Gmail, and Istios was owned by Google for a very long time. And so you have Google is the big player, and then you have a couple of different companies that are heavily involved. And then this one's just the one that people choose to put their companies and their profiles. So I'll actually skip over this one because I want to show these visualizations with a little bit better data for those. But whenever I know somebody mentioned something about, okay, there's a big exodus or that there's some type of implosion that's happening in a project, how can I predict that or understand where there's risks? This is another one of the more complex visualizations. I'll try to keep it relatively light, but a lot of times, especially if you're managing a community, you want to know where the problem areas are before it becomes a larger issue. So for example, if you have a large portion of your code base that's unmaintained, so you can see what is the contribution activity versus how long has it been since somebody who is active in that portion of the code base has been seen in any part of the community. Even if somebody, say for this example, we can go like in the common folder, that somebody has not committed in that folder in 3 years, but they are involved in other parts of the project, opening issues. They're still actively involved in the community, still have that knowledge base. But if you have sections of your code base where that knowledge retention isn't there, you want to know that to be able to manage it before a huge backlog of PRs is open, for example. And you also know if you want to try to convert people from a contributor to a maintainer. So this is just a good example of some of the more in-depth visualizations once you get into some more mature community management or trying to understand a project from the outside of being like, okay, there's portions of this code base that seem like they're pretty unmaintained. How do I feel about that? Does that impact my want to get involved, or does that impact the way that we get involved? So I just talked a lot. I'm going to put in the FINOS repo, even though or orgs, even though I know it's not completely full. But actually, I'm going to do the CHAOSS one to show the last visualization that I want to really go into. So I think it's a different visualization than a lot of the other ones. And this is project velocity. All of these other visualizations group together the contents of the search bar. So all of the different repos. In project velocity, it compares the different repositories, and you can choose what you care about and being like, okay, issues being opened or PRs being merged, what date range, and you can see different repositories activity compared to one another in a pretty systematic way. And so if you're trying to choose between a couple of different repositories or understanding the activity and size and comparison, this is a great visualization to go to understand how to compare them all. So that's my main spiel, and let's hope everyone has lots of questions and we can talk more about it.
This is one of the coolest metrics tools that I've seen, right? You know what I mean? When you showed me this at the member summit, I was just gobsmacked. And to see how it's grown, especially that community management piece that you just said, as well as the dependencies, like that's new.
We also have a complete redesign coming soon. This has been something that it's always the joke of like engineers, when engineers are left to design. That's what happened with this. And now we've actually have some amazing designers in CHAOSS Africa have done a complete redesign. They're wonderful UX UI designers. And so we have that in the works. Okay. If my firm, yes. And so you can create a view of select if I wanted to put SEO and then I don't know, the FINOS perspective, any set of repositories I can put in there, put in the search bar. And that's also one of the main reasons why we have the user groups. Because if there's the same like set of 20 repositories, you're always wanting to go and look back. It gets annoying to select each one each time. So you can just make your account, select your user group, and look at them all together. A lot of times I do that for if I'm doing like CNCF analysis for Red Hat. I just have the different groupings so that whenever I log in, I can just say I want to see CNCF incubating projects and select instead of having to put 100 and something repositories in a search bar.
Awesome. Thanks, Cali.
Let me see.
Kelly, I had a question, but thank you for joining the call and demoing this. This is really great. I joined a little late. Can you explain the difference between Augur and 8-knot?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I have a good visualization for this actually that I like to use. So how you can think about it at a very high level is you give Augur your repo or organization URLs, and that stores it, populates the data in a relational database. That Augur database is its own thing, has all the data, and the data goes into 8-knot. So if you've ever used a tool like Superset maybe, or any of the dashboarding tools, you put in the database credentials into the visualization platform, and that's how it accesses the data, and that's how it works for 8-knot. When you like launch 8-knot, if you run it locally, you just give it the database credentials, and then that's how it populates all the visualizations.
Yes. So it reminds me a bit of some of the stuff you get out of Backstage. I was wondering if this plugs into Backstage or it can be used with it, or
I've heard the name before, but I'm not super familiar with what it is.
Yeah. James, can you describe what Backstage is? I think I'm probably going to mess it up.
Yeah, I can. So Backstage is a developer portal which was contributed into CNCF by Spotify, and it's very versatile. It comes with a whole host of different plugins and extensions. But really what it does, it enhances developer experience around open source, maybe even inner source projects, by giving you like an entry point where you can search for something that may be of interest to you and your engineering team. And then there's an easy onboarding and easy contribution model. What Rob was saying about metrics coming into Backstage is actually really interesting, because I didn't think about that. In the background, I've been pulling together a bit of a roundtable surrounding this subject. Yeah, and that would be really interesting to see whether Backstage as a dev portal could support this type of view, especially against project repositories.
I definitely think that it could. Like Backstage, essentially what James was saying, plug and play tool. I got to spin up this project. I need to find all my reusable components. Backstage, it's like a curative library based on all of your reusable components there. What would be really nice is to have that metrics backing point like 8-Knot to bring into a Backstage integration, because ostensibly it's just another tool connected with all of the repositories that you're currently leveraging. Ideally, that's what I'm saying with like inner source, what James was saying too. It'd be perfect because all of a sudden you have your 50 tools that you're leveraging in Backstage. Now you can have all the metrics behind it, like quantifiable quality metrics. That's actually a really good idea, is to potentially look at a Backstage integration. And they have a large maintaining pool.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely look into that. I'm going to write that down because it reminds me of some of the conversations that I'm having around analyzing SBOMs, because that's now just like a huge thing. And there's some tools that I'm hoping to get open sourced where they're analyzing SBOMs and then trying to use 8-Knot to provide more in-depth analysis on the communities that are involved in the dependencies identified in an SBOM.
Yeah, and there's a DevOps, John Mark, I think he runs the DevOps SIG. John Mark and a couple other folks run the DevOps SIG for FINOS. I think that happens on Thursdays. Kelly, I could forward you the invite. They talk a lot about Backstage and Backstage integrations. If you wanted to join in, jump in and meet some of those folks too.
Yeah, send me over that information. I'll be curious. I wrote some notes down. I'm going to look into it.
We actually have a Backstage working group as well every couple of weeks. But yeah, I think it's a good fit because Backstage has got this kind of, it's got a data model, but it's federated, so you can plug in different sources of data. And so I think it would work quite well.
I'm also just going to put this in the background while we're talking. People want any pointers on getting involved with something that you're interested in. If you have any specific community questions or visualization ideas, open an issue. If you hit a bug, please open an issue. We're a young project, and that even just going and playing with the hosted application and breaking it is helpful. Knowing we know where those pain points are and we can fix them. And if you have a company that's looking to, or project that's looking to leverage 8-Knot, email me. Let's talk about it. I can help talk about how that would work, to have your own instance of how that would all work, and Augur. And then if it's something that you're more deeply looking to get involved in, what the different areas of support from like a technical contribution standpoint, some of our needs are.
Is it worth us just going back through the questions that got raised at the beginning of the meeting and seeing if there's anything that we can try and answer now?
Yeah, let's go back through.
Amol was talking about, raised a whole bunch of things, like I think you've answered a couple, like finding out who's supporting a project. But he asked about licenses and security issues. Is there anything, do you do any reports around that kind? I suppose you have to.
Yeah, so let me take CHAOSS out. Or yeah, for the security side of it, that's when I would lean into the OpenSSF scorecard. The hope is in the future that we'd be doing some security analysis from an SBOM perspective. GitHub now provides like SBOM outputs of all the repositories, which is super useful.
Please don't use those. Please don't
use them.
No.
Okay, good to know. I haven't gone down this alley at all yet, so I'm glad to know they're bad.
They're terrible. And that's saying somebody that works on SBOM standards for basically, I'm the co-author of the SPDX one. So no, we love that they're in SPDX, but the quality is an issue. And at the same way, just as a note, I know 8-Knot, the licensing data and the dependency data is not accurate that you have. It's a good indicator.
For which one?
I'm from Augur. I know Sean, so I've been talking to him about how it works. Both the dependency data and the licensing data is not accurate. And that's just the way how it works. For me, that's also not how I'm using 8-Knot.
Oh, have you been using 8-Knot like regularly? That's awesome. Like,
because for me, it's an indicator. It's an indicator tool of something needs further research.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not, and that's to be clear. Like there's different types of tools that have different kind of color. For me, it's how I look at. For me, this is a community assessment tool. I look at the health of projects and so just give me some insights. I don't use it for licensing. I don't use it for security because the data is simply not accurate enough.
Yeah, if there's any data that you're seeing that's inaccurate, I really ask to please open an issue.
I discussed this with Sean. So the problem, so there's again, it's maybe too much. The way how Sean does dependency analysis, is it gives some, but it's inaccurate. Similar-wise,
Okay.
the licensing reported is only the main license or the declared license, is not the actual license.
Okay.
And that's, look, I work in like this field for 8 years. I was running my OSPOs and basically looking at actually having the concrete data, because working in automotive, we actually get fined for this stuff if we get it wrong.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So again, this whole field of, I know a lot of people want to have a tool for everything and connect everything to everything. Getting dependencies, licensing is way more complex than most people think it is.
Oh yeah.
We're working on open sourcing this, like making a data pool. Like a lot of the German automotive manufacturers are now working on open sourcing way more data on there. But yeah, we're not yet there.
Yeah, like completely understandable. But again, please open issues of anything that you see is inaccurate. For then you can change at least the representation of it, making sure that people who don't have as much knowledge as you do understand like what they're looking at.
Yeah, I was wondering can you give us a bit of an insight about, because you're using this, right?
I am using it externally, right? Just working and just doing my own stuff. But what we're trying to do is we are trying to bring it in-house, right? That's my goal. There's only so much I can say, but I do want to bring it in. It's just a matter of being able to support it. And then also I am of the mindset that if I'm going to be consuming something from the open and I would want to file issues, I want to be able to give back to it. So I'm doing like a two-prong attack here. So I want to actually have some open source maintainers be able to give back to this project. So that's my goal. So I'm hopefully maybe by the end of the summer, Cali and I could come back together and talk about how we were able to leverage this tool. And to Thomas's point too, yeah, not all data is going to be completely accurate with any particular tool, but I'd say if you could find a more comprehensive metrics tool from a community standard, right? I'd love to see it. That's not like a FOSSA or not something like that. I'd love to see it.
So what we have been working on, we now got funding pools, is to basically pull in things that are Sean doing into our complete sets. Because again, we already have a really good open source SEA tool. We already know all of the dependencies. We already have good licensing data. We already have some security data. Now the next thing is adding community stuff there, but we do it slightly differently. So I use tools like 8 to visualize things, but since as an OSPO, I want to do things at scale and at speed, we actually write policy rules on top of it. So our engine has for licensing, security, and inner source all kind of policy rules, and the similar wise we want to write on community data, we write also policy rules. So tons of people have asked me, like, and I think it's a stupid rule. We don't want to have dependencies that have a single maintainer. I think good luck, because 40% of the node ecosystem is a single maintainer. But hey, if they want to write those rules, be it. But for me, it's more interesting to see if you have what you showed, the shift in data. So if you see, hey, new contributors are all coming in down, that will be for me an interesting signal to write a rule to let the development team, hey, your core dependency, the open source project that we just invested millions in to build something on top of it, it seemed to be losing contributors at a rapid rate. You might want to look into that. But look, we're not going to block their build, but as I said, we want to write rules that we can give a signal to the team to basically, hey, this critical dependency, and maybe then as an OSPO, we might want to look at it like, hey, if the team is not responding, then maybe as an OSPO, I now need to step in, because maybe in my aggregate data, I can then see, hey, we have 9 teams using that thing. If that dependency goes down, I have a problem in my organization.
Yeah. I really like how you're like, a lot of times people, especially at early phases, and I get it, just want me to say, okay, if my number is here, or it looks like this, and this is good, bad, or otherwise, it's more, you can't like just investigate everything endlessly. You don't have enough time. My hope with a lot of these visualizations is that they point you into a direction of investigation to understand more about your community and how you want to invest or how you want to protect yourself or any of those things.
Yeah, so our workflow that I've been looking at, but that now I got distracted with other stuff, was to basically have a inserted data, rules on it, trigger it, and then in the rules we have a so-called how to fix me text, do a link to 8 to basically show like, hey, this is where you actually see the actual visualization of what is happening, because that's what we don't do. Our tools is ingesting data, writing rules on it, potentially blocking a build, and then in the how to fix me text, that's where we then link to another tool to basically say, here you see the actual visualization, why it is. Again, the whole idea for us is to basically consume multiple data streams, compared against our open source policy as code, then make digital decisions, and then basically refer to, instead of what I hated is like, Duke, we have all of these great tools, but for my developers, it's, oh, I have this tool for this tool for that, this tool for that. It's just
a lot.
Too much.
And also, I'm sorry, who is we in your, who are you, like, what organization or company are you talking about? I'm just curious.
So the project that I work for is open source review toolkit. We're a collection. Most of the things are German automotive manufacturers.
Oh, nice.
And all kind of suppliers. And I'm basically currently I'm in between jobs, so I'm just now one of the I've been one of the founders of the project over some days, and we're trying to really get all of the data in. And there's other commercial tools that claim to do the same, have this community data. The problem that I have with them is that they define the metrics.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with this metrics. So I had conversations with both Dawn and Sean from the CHAOSS community to basically like, how first we were like, oh, we can also define our metrics, and now we are more, as I talking to Dawn and Sean, we should just basically figure out a way that our users can define by themselves how they want to do the metrics and how they want to do. Maybe we have reference implementations where they can just pick and choose. And I think that's also where CHAOSS community has a nice overview for where they're now making, oh, if you want to do this is the menu of metrics where you can. So we might want to mimic what they're doing and make them like an a la carte menu where you can pick from.
Yes, I'm just bringing up the metrics just for people who aren't familiar with them, because big fan of it's, especially as a starting point. Once you go down the rabbit hole, you start to learn a lot more. But when especially, I still honestly refer to a lot of this stuff, but they have so many defined metrics, and they're not the ending point, but they are a really good starting point. I'm just clicking around where you like development responsiveness, and they have metric models, user stories, and defined, and so it's a good, especially if you're starting out on your open source metrics journey. CHAOSS has a ton of awesome resources, and so the people, Don Foster, the head of data science for them, and Sean Goggins are just fantastic people to work with.
Good tip. Thank you for that.
So, first of all, great project. I had one observation. So, are there any thoughts around what type of contributors does a good, healthy open source project need? For example, as you mentioned, now we have designers, right? Similarly, if you don't have technical writer contributors, the project suffers. Well, some of them might not, or maybe the engineers are taking up those roles. I was wondering, how do you assess and maybe then later on visualize the profiles of the contributors, like engineering background or product background, design background, technical writers, etc.?
I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure. We've never gone down that alley on the spot. If somebody was like, figure out from this project what type of activity we have around different types of contributions, if there was different portions of the code base where those things normally happened, I'd probably look at the activity around those portions of the code base to get an idea of how many people are doing that style of work. But that's just like on top of my head here. But it's something that I've never explored, and I'm not really sure how to do that directly without people like self-identifying themselves as designers or different.
Yeah.
Cali,
I was thinking the same. GitHub doesn't have a way to specify what profession you're in. Sorry, go ahead.
I can help you out since I'm way too much. Gromer, the other tool that CHAOSS has. So maybe if you go to Cali, if you go to the software tab, there's two tools listed from CHAOSS. So Gromer is the other tool, and in Gromer you can make don't quote me on the exact feature name, but just think of it as a people map. So you can augment data from particular users. So you can basically say, it's like, for instance, I have multiple GitHub and GitLab accounts, and you can basically tie those all together to my identity. And then you can add additional data attributes to me, for instance, saying, oh, I am maybe a JavaScript developer, but you have to actually. Gilmer has the capability of this, but you have to do that yourself. There's a couple of people who wrote some scripts, but you have to do yourself. So the data models are there to do that, but you have to do the data collection and the mapping and all the stuff. And then in Grillmer, you can then do the drill down and you can see these are developers, these are designers, and it's all there, but as I said, you need to do a lot of more legwork before you do. So it's technically it's designed if you have in your own organization and you, for instance, have active to your internal Active Directory. So one of the to-do group members that I know, they basically they wrote a little tool to take their Active Directory where they know like the person's department, and then they get that data and then they generate the map for it. And then they can then see in their metrics, oh, these people are from the design department, these people are from engineering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, the problem is you need to have the data source.
Yeah, but also Kelly and I, we talked about this before too. Yeah, Grimoire it's a great tool, but it's insanely complicated, right? It is. It's incredibly complicated. You don't want to necessarily go into your LDAP system. 8-Knock simplifies a lot of different facets of this. So also too, you need to be careful when you're talking about getting your Active Directory data and pulling that in and in contributions. That's a whole different level of privacy. And I don't know how many companies right now allow that sort of situation. This person does X amount of times of contributions. You really shouldn't be doing that. So any company that's doing that's like psychological safety and that's like bringing up some ethical issues in my mind. But what you can do within 8-Knot, what Kelly showed me is you can break it up relatively a little bit easier than Grimoire. Grimoire is genius, super smart, really hard to support. But you can actually break it up by organizations like your enterprise architecture or your principles or things along those lines. There's a way that you can do that. But like I said, I got to file some issues, Kelly. I'm sorry. I do. I got to file a couple things.
Please.
Because I want to
Open
develop on this
issues.
project too. I'm going to open some issues and I'm going to learn how to do a couple of things because of this.
Yeah, no, but I agree. Grillmer is looking at a massive switchboard with too much dials. It's very powerful.
It is.
But it's really an overload.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated.
All right. Look, I'm going to jump in at this point and just thank Cali for coming along to present today. That was brilliant and obviously invoked a lot of passionate debate as a result. Well done. That was great.
Thank you.
I'll get this up on the OSR website in a week or so, so we can share it with the rest of the internet to have a look at. But yeah, I think this is, certainly prompted me to think about a lot of things. Yeah, thanks for coming along. Does anyone have any last things to say, or should we leave it there? No, we're all good. Yeah. All right, brilliant. Thanks for joining, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Yep.